We always hear how kindness is like the ultimate solution. Like, if everyone was just nicer, things would be better. But what if there's a downside? What if being too kind could actually backfire?
It's a fascinating idea.
It really is. And that's exactly what we're diving into today with this article called The Dark Side of Kindness, 7+1 Ways It Can Harm You.
Oh, wow.
Right.
7+1 ways. That's a lot of darkness.
It's a lot to unpack, but it's not about becoming, like, totally jaded. It's more about, are we accidentally messing things up by being too nice?
Okay, I'm intrigued. Where do we even begin?
Well, the first point that really jumped out at me was about unrealistic expectations. Like, have you ever been there? You do something really nice for someone, go above and beyond, and then
100%.
and then you're kind of bummed when they don't, like, repay the favor.
Oh, totally. Like you're keeping score or something? Not a good look.
No, definitely not. And the article connects that experience to this idea from the Stoics. They talk about aligning our control.
Hmm.
So we have control over our own actions, our own intentions behind being kind, but we don't have any control over how the other person reacts.
Right, right. We can't control how they receive it or if they reciprocate in the way we expect.
Exactly. And the article even uses this example, I think it was about a friend, where someone was constantly doing everything for them. Like, at first, the friend was super thankful.
Sure.
But then over time, it created this weird dynamic.
How so?
Well, it's like the friend just started to expect it. They never actually learned how to handle things on their own.
So it's almost like by doing too much, we're kind of enabling them.
That's a good way to put it. And the article even uses this phrase, like smothering with kindness, which at first sounds kind of funny.
Yeah.
But then you think about it, and it's like, yeah, if you're always doing everything for someone, you're creating this comfy bubble where they never really have to face challenges or grow.
It's counterintuitive. True kindness might sometimes mean letting people struggle a little so they can build their own strength and resilience.
Wow, I like that. It's like we think we're helping, but we might actually be holding them back.
Exactly. And that ties into this next pitfall, which is all about the risk of sacrificing our own priorities when we're overly focused on being kind to everyone else.
Oof, yeah, I can see how that happens. It's easy to get caught up in being the nice one, the helpful one, to the point where we completely lose sight of our own needs and goals.
Right. And it's not sustainable, is it?
Not at all.
Mhm.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. Eventually, you got nothing left to give.
And the Stoics were all about self-awareness. They believed that to truly live a good life, you have to understand your own values, your own priorities, and live in alignment with those. But if we're constantly putting everyone else first, always sacrificing our needs to please others, are we really honoring our own values?
That's a really good question. And it makes me wonder, could this tendency to constantly put ourselves last, could it sometimes be a way of avoiding our own stuff?
What do you mean?
Like, maybe we're subconsciously using all this helping and giving as a way to avoid dealing with our own difficult emotions or unmet needs. Like, if we're always so busy taking care of everyone else, we don't have to face our own stuff.
It's an interesting thought. I mean, the article doesn't get into the psychology behind it too much, but it's worth considering. Are we filling a void in ourselves by constantly tending to the needs of others?
Right. That's definitely something to think about. Okay, so we've talked about setting realistic expectations and making sure we're not sacrificing our own needs in the name of kindness. What's next on the list of dark sides?
Okay, so this next one might be a little tougher to hear because it touches on the image we project to other people. Basically, sometimes being overly helpful can come across as weakness.
Wait, really? That doesn't seem fair. I always thought of kindness as a sign of strength.
It definitely can be. But there's this fine line, right? There's a difference between genuine kindness and letting people walk all over you. If you're constantly overextending yourself, not setting boundaries.
It's like you're saying, hey, my time and energy aren't that valuable.
Exactly. And it can inadvertently invite disrespect.
So it's almost like a lack of self-respect can actually lead to a lack of respect from others.
Precisely. And what's interesting is that the Stoics believed the opposite was true as well. They argued that setting firm but compassionate boundaries actually commands more respect from others.
So saying no more often can actually make you more powerful, not less.
Exactly. Because it shows you're clear about your limits, about what you're willing to tolerate, and you're not willing to compromise your well-being, even for the sake of being nice.
That's a really good point. Wow, this is eye-opening already. Okay, so we're learning to set boundaries. We're being mindful of what we're projecting. What else is lurking in the shadows of kindness?
All right, well, this next one might hit home for some people because It deals with those relationships that just feel a little gone. We're talking about one-sided relationships, those situations where you're always the one giving.
Ouch, yeah, I've definitely been there. You're the one who always goes above and beyond, lends a helping hand, but then when it's time for fun or hanging out just for the sake of it, you're suddenly invisible.
It's like they only value you for what you can do for them, not for who you are as a person.
That's exactly it. It's so
Yeah.
frustrating. So how do we avoid falling into those one-sided traps? What are some signs we can watch out for?
Well, the Stoics were big on this idea of discernment, really paying attention to the subtle cues in our relationships.
Like, is there a balance? Is there give and take on both sides?
Exactly. Or is it always one person doing the heavy lifting?
Or are you basically carrying the weight of the relationship on your own?
Right. And if you find you're always the one giving, always the one making the effort, it might be time to reevaluate things.
Yeah, because like we were saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. Eventually, you just burn out.
You get depleted and resentful. And what's interesting is that that depletion can actually attract more of the same. It's like this weird law of attraction thing, but applied to generosity.
Okay, that's fascinating. So you're saying that if we're constantly overgiving, constantly draining ourselves for others, we're actually more likely to attract people who are also in that energy of neediness.
That's the idea, like attract, like, right. So if you're running on fumes, always giving till it hurts, it creates this kind of energetic vacuum that tends to draw in other people who are also running on empty.
And those are usually the people who are looking for what they can get, not what they can give back.
Exactly.
So it's like a vicious cycle. The more you overgive, the more you attract people who reinforce that pattern of like taking and needing. So how do we break free from that? How do we stop attracting those energy vampires?
It's not easy, but this is where the Stoics would really emphasize those concepts of discernment and self-discipline. Discernment meaning being really selective about who we choose to help and how much we're willing to give. And self-discipline being that inner strength to say no when we need to, even when it feels uncomfortable.
So it's about being a conscious creator, right? Like consciously choosing where we direct our energy and what kind of people we allow into our lives. Because otherwise, we become a magnet for energy vampires.
Which is the opposite of what we want. And speaking of unexpected downsides, this next one is a big one, and it's about how even kindness, believe it or not, can become addictive.
Okay, now this is blowing my mind a little bit. Addicted to helping. How is that even possible? Isn't kindness supposed to be a good thing?
It is, but it's all about balance, isn't it? Anything taken to an extreme can become unhealthy, even something that starts from a good place. The Stoics were all about moderation.
So they recognize that even something like helping others can become a way to avoid dealing with our own issues, maybe to seek external validation, or even to try to maintain a sense of control.
Exactly.
So it's like we get hooked on that feeling of being needed, of being the hero.
Right, and over time, it can become this whole thing.
An addiction. Wow. So how can we tell if our kindness has crossed that line? What are some red flags to look out for?
Well, the article emphasizes how important it is to listen to the people who love us.
Because they can often see things more clearly than we can, right?
Totally. Like they might notice if we're always saying yes to everything and everyone, even when it's clearly stressing us out, or if we're constantly putting ourselves last to the point where it's starting to affect our own well-being.
So if someone we trust is expressing concern, it's probably a good idea to listen up,
Exactly. They might be seeing something that we're blind to.
even if it's not easy to hear.
It's still valuable information.
Okay, so we're staying aware of our motives, we're making sure we're not overextending ourselves, and we're actually listening when people close to us are like, hey, are you sure you're okay?
Exactly. Because sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is to set a boundary.
And speaking of boundaries, what's the last pitfall of kindness we should be on the lookout for?
This one's a bit strange, but it's true. Sometimes being genuinely kind can actually make other people suspicious.
Seriously, isn't that a little sad? Like, we've gotten to a point where genuine kindness is so rare that it throws people off.
It is sad, but it's like they've been burned so many times before that they assume there must be a catch. They can't fathom that someone might actually be kind just for the sake of it.
Wow. That says a lot more about them than it does about the person being kind, doesn't it?
Exactly. And it's a good reminder for us not to project our own cynicism or baggage onto others.
Just because someone's being nice doesn't mean they have an ulterior motive.
Right. It's about finding that balance, right, between protecting ourselves from potential harm and staying open to the possibility of genuine goodness.
Yeah, because we don't want to become so jaded that we can't even recognize true kindness when we see it.
That's right.
So, wow. This has been quite the eye-opening exploration of the dark side of kindness. I feel like we've covered so much ground, from unrealistic expectations to, like, literally attracting the wrong people, and even the possibility of getting addicted to helping.
That's a lot to process.
It really is. But the good news is this article doesn't just leave us hanging with all these potential pitfalls. It also offers some really solid Stoic strategies for navigating all this complexity.
Practical tips we can actually use.
Exactly. And they're all about empowering us to be more intentional with our kindness, so that it's coming from a healthy place and creating the kind of relationships we actually want.
Sustainable relationships.
Exactly. So where do we even begin? What's the first step toward making sure our kindness is the real deal and not backfiring on us?
It all starts with something so simple, but it's often overlooked. We have to learn to listen to our feelings.
Oh, man, that's so true. It's so easy to get stuck in our heads, overthinking everything, and completely ignore what our bodies and our emotions are trying to tell us.
It's like we're disconnected from ourselves.
Totally.
No?
And the Stoics were all about that mind-body connection. They recognized that our emotions, while not always perfectly reliable, offer valuable insights into ourselves and our experiences.
So if we're constantly feeling drained or taken advantage of when we're being helpful, that's a huge red flag.
Our body's trying to tell us something.
Exactly. It's like, hey, pay attention. This isn't working.
So it's not about judging ourselves for having those feelings. It's about using them as information to guide our actions. Like, okay, I'm feeling resentful right now. What is that telling me about this situation? Where do I need to set a boundary?
Exactly. It's about tuning into our own inner wisdom, trusting our gut.
I love that. Okay, so we're listening to our feelings. We're tuning into our intuition. What else? What other Stoic strategies can help us navigate the dark side of kindness?
This next one is huge, and it's something a lot of people struggle with. We have to get comfortable with saying no.
Oh man, tell me about it. That is a tough one. It's like we're conditioned to be people pleasers, to always say yes, even when it's to our own detriment.
It's like we're afraid of disappointing people or coming across as selfish. But the Stoics would argue that saying no is actually an act of self-preservation. It's about recognizing that our time and energy are precious, limited resources.
We only get so much energy in a day, and we get to choose how we spend it. Just
Right.
like we wouldn't, hand over our credit card to every stranger who asked, we don't have to say yes to every request or demand on our time and attention.
Exactly. And the people who genuinely care about you, they'll understand.
In fact, setting those boundaries can actually make those relationships stronger in the long run because it creates a more sustainable dynamic, one where everyone feels respected and valued.
Absolutely. It's about moving away from that people-pleasing model and moving towards a model of authentic relating, showing up as our full selves, needs and all.
I love that.
Right.
Okay, so we're listening to our feelings, we're setting healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
What's next on the list of Stoic wisdom?
This one might sound a little cliche, but it's crucial. We have to prioritize self-care.
Yes, self-care is not selfish.
Not at all. The Stoics believed it was essential.
And it's not just about bubble baths and face masks, although those are great.
Of course, those can be nice.
Yeah. But it's really about making a conscious effort to nourish ourselves on all levels, mind, body, and spirit.
Because when we take care of ourselves, we're better equipped to show up for others.
Exactly. We can't pour from an empty cup.
So true.
So instead of treating self-care as a luxury or something we squeeze in if we happen to have time left over at the end of the day, we have to actually schedule it into our calendars like any other important appointment.
Make it non-negotiable.
Because if we wait till our to-do list is empty, it'll never happen.
Right. There's always going to be something else to do.
So self-care is about making ourselves a priority
Exactly.
and filling our own cup first so that we can give to others from a place of overflow, not from a place of depletion.
Yes. Beautifully said.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, listening to our feelings, setting boundaries, making time for self-care. What's the final Stoic strategy for navigating this whole dark side of kindness thing?
This one's all about being discerning in our relationships. Really paying attention to which relationships truly nourish us and which ones tend to drain us.
Okay, so this is where we talk about those energy vampires.
It is. And I know it can be tough. It's not always easy to distance ourselves from people, especially if it's someone we care about.
Right, because we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings.
But sometimes creating a little bit of distance is the kindest thing we can do, both for ourselves and for them.
It's about recognizing that not all relationships are created equal. Some relationships are like, oh my gosh, I feel so energized and inspired after spending time with that person.
Yeah.
And then there are those other relationships where you're just like, ugh, I feel completely drained.
Drained.
Like you just gave away a pint of blood.
Exactly. And sometimes we have to love those people from afar.
Create some healthy boundaries.
Exactly.
Because again, you can't pour from an empty cup.
You can't.
You've got to take care of yourself first.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means making some tough choices about where you direct your energy and who you allow into your inner circle.
It's about prioritizing your own well-being so that you can show up as the best version of yourself, both for yourself and for the people who matter most.
Wow, we've covered so much ground today. It's like, who knew kindness could be so complicated?
Right. It's not just about being nice. It's a whole thing.
Totally. But the good news is, we're not just left to fend for ourselves in this sea of nuance. We've got these Stoic strategies to guide us. We're talking about tuning into our feelings, setting healthy boundaries, prioritizing self-care, and choosing our relationships wisely.
All about being intentional.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious. The article focuses on the dangers of being too kind, but could we swing too far in the other direction? Like, could we become so focused on protecting ourselves that we miss out on opportunities for genuine connection and generosity?
That's a great question, and it's something to be mindful of for sure. It's all about finding that balance, right? The Stoics weren't advocating for a life devoid of kindness.
Right.
They just recognized that, like anything else, it needs to be approached with awareness.
So it's not about becoming cold or uncaring. It's about being discerning, making sure our generosity is coming from a genuine place.
Exactly. It's about being kind with both an open heart and a discerning mind.
I love that. Kindness with an open heart and a discerning mind. That's a good takeaway.
It's a practice.
It is. It's something we cultivate over time.
Well, this has been such a thought-provoking conversation. I know I'm going to be reflecting on these ideas for a while, and I hope our listeners will too.
Me too. It's a conversation worth revisiting.
Absolutely. Because ultimately, it's about finding that sweet spot between giving too much and holding back.
It's about being real, both with ourselves and with others.
Yes. Authentic connection, genuine kindness. That's what we're all striving for. Well, on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the dark side of kindness. It's been real.
It has. Thanks for having me.